Welcome to the Beau Show. Everyone knows by now that there was a tragic shooting on the subway in Brooklyn, New York. A suspect has been captured by the NYPD, and I guess time will tell what the true motive was. What I want to focus on today is not what happened specifically, but why it happened, and what circumstances perhaps permitted it to happen. Not from the shooter's motive, since we may not fully know it yet, but the general auspices of a place like New York City. It's a well-known fact that ever since the pandemic, crime is up, especially violent crime. But today I want to go into the reasons this might be happening, especially in more Democrat-run cities. Now, before you think, why are you politicizing a tragedy? I'm not. I'm not looking to score any political points here. What I'm doing is providing a careful analysis of what happened last week, which is not an anomaly by any stretch of the imagination. And while you want to look at each individual violent situation separately, you also have to look at trends and what made such heinous crimes possible. Now, some media outlets will try to avoid mentioning a criminal's name, as they say that that might make them a martyr. I disagree with that, because in knowing someone's name, it takes the anonymity out of it and puts a face with a name and history. That's important because it puts it on a human level. Who was this man? Where did he come from? What were his hopes and dreams? Was he mentally ill? Did the system fail him? Or did he fail the system? Frank James is someone whose name we have to say because we need to know what led him to that Brooklyn shooting spree and what conditions led him to be able to do this. That's what I want to focus on today. I have no preconceived notions about Frank James, but I do want to know what motivated him. According to the New York Post, James, 62, worked as a machinist at Curtiss-Wright, a massive defense contractor, for 17 months, suing the company for racial discrimination in Newark federal court after he was fired in March 1991 for insubordination. His bosses at the time said James failed to fill out inspection sheets and made parts incorrectly, and then blew off directives to fix the sloppy work. Decades-old court papers are revealing. He was disciplined 8 times in his final 13 months with the company, including for excessive absenteeism, and was once suspended for 3 days for, quote, failure to perform, according to accounts from Curtiss-Wright employees filed by the company in response to Frank James' 1991 lawsuit. In 1990, then shop foreman Kevin Noon told James that he should correct his mistakes before his shift ended and not leave the work for the next operator. After James ignored him, Noon's supervisor gave James a 3-day suspension, since it was the second warning for the same violation within the past 3 months. After James was fired for this dereliction of performance, he subsequently would call his former employer to make terroristic threats, local prosecutors told the New York Post. Therefore, in 1995, he was found guilty of harassment. A judge tossed James' discrimination case, noting that he had failed to show how race played a factor in his termination. And even the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission found that James was disciplined the same amount of times as white employees for the same infractions. In 1997, James filed for bankruptcy, and the judge dismissed his outstanding debts, which included $7,000 in back taxes. Okay, so let's review just this part of James' background. He worked as a machinist, but failed to perform up to par, so he was disciplined and then terminated. He immediately jumped to racial conclusions about this, and so he filed a discrimination suit, which he lost because he failed to prove it. And then also the EEOC noted that his discipline was in line with white and Asian employees. Now let's also look into some of Frank James' many social media posts. He was not exactly bashful. One of his meme posts read, "Oh, Black Jesus, please kill all the whiteys." He was not exactly complimentary to Asians or Hispanics either. And he even took New York's new mayor, Eric Adams, to task on social media, saying, quote, "Mr. Mayor, I'm a victim of your mental health program. I'm 63, now full of hate, full of anger, and full of bitterness," end quote. James complained about Adams when referring to how many homeless people he encountered on the subways of New York. Once again, According to the New York Post, James said in the videos that he had a diagnosed mental illness and railed against what he called the, quote, horror show of the city's mental health services. He said, quote, "What's going on in that place is violence," referring to a facility where he had claimed to have received care. Quote, "Not physical violence, but the kind of violence a child experiences in grade school that would make him go get a gun and shoot mother effers." James even predicted a coming racial war in these tirades, saying, quote, "It's just a matter of time before these white mother effers decide, hey, listen, enough is enough. These N-words got to go." Because James saw the world as one of white on black oppression, just like Colin Kaepernick and BLM does. James felt there really was very little choice for him. So he rambled on, quote, "And so the message to me is, I should have gotten a gun and just started shooting mother effers. Or I should have gotten some dope and started shooting or started hitting bees in the head, robbing old ladies. You know what the F it is," unquote. James had a 9mm gun, a hatchet, gasoline, a smoke grenade, and consumer-grade fireworks on him at the time. James may have been a lone wolf in this attack, but he's not an ideological lone wolf. You may remember Darrell Brooks Jr., who allegedly plowed his car into the Waukesha Christmas parade last November. And Noah Green, the Nation of Islam adherent who rammed Capitol Police last April. 21-year-old BLM activist Quintez Brown was charged with attempted murder of Louisville, Kentucky mayoral candidate Craig Greenberg. James, Brooks, Green, and Brown are all adherents of black identity extremism. And we know this by many of their social media droppings. James posted material on social media linked to black identity extremist ideologies, including the Nation of Islam, Black Panthers, Black Liberation Army, BLM, and an image of black nationalist cop killer Micah Johnson. He did not believe white and black people should have any contact with each other. And he even expressed contempt for new Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson for having a white husband, whom James called the enemy. In many of James' YouTube videos, he was an avid fan of CNN, where people like Don Lemon and Joy Reid have been spewing this racially fueled bait for years. So when we think about his mental state, and even when we talk about how terrorists in the Middle East become radicalized, it may be no surprise that Frank James was influenced to some degree by the racially tinged themes coming from CNN. To that point, James made videos about Ukraine and the whiteys there. Well, who else makes comments like that? CNN does. He likens the Russian genocide of Ukraine as what white people do to their own people, and then they'll do it to black people. So Frank James says it makes him want to kill everything in sight. Let's hear some of James' thoughts directly from him.
This is Prophet True Channel, but I am the Prophet of Doom. That's my original name, the Prophet of Doom. That's what I've called myself since I've been on YouTube. What do you think that's a, what? So what do you want from me? Doomsday is actually about to be here. We're actually about to experience Doomsday. So of course, why would you want to watch and listen to Prophet of Doom? Not mad at you one bit. But I'm going to talk about it because it has to be talked about. We need to know why we're going to die. We need to know why we're going to be destroyed. I want you to delude yourself and tell yourself this punk ass bullshit about that could never happen here. That could never happen here. Those are famous last words. That could never happen here. Yes, it could, and it will. And if they tried to exterminate us, I would not be mad at them one bit, because of and that's the you are, refuses to understand that you have a serious problem that you have not dealt with since they so-called set you free, and they didn't set you free, they turned you loose. You cannot set free a domesticated animal. You can only turn it loose. And that's what was done to you. And your refusal to understand that means the death of your children.
Now we know that at the time of the shooting, it was not suspected as a terrorist attack. However, that tune has changed. James is charged with federal domestic terrorism. But wait, I thought the FBI and Joe Biden have told us that the biggest domestic terrorism threat in this country is white supremacy.
And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. A rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat.
So why did the FBI and NYPD change its tune? Did none of them know about James' hundreds of social media posts spewing racist hatred? Did Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, and Sundar Pichai know about this guy? Well, they sure wanted to take down any Canadian truckers' posts about medical freedom and anything supporting Donald Trump. They felt that was white supremacy.